Said one of the most effective things you can do to build better habits is to join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior.
Oh, wow.
Right? So culture is that series of behaviors, right? Isn't that cool?
I'm just processing that right now.
I know.
I wish that was the camera so they could see.
One of the most effective things you can do to build better habits is to join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. I love that because that helps us understand that if you want to build a better culture, you have to understand, again, what behaviors are present when we are in sync, collaborating, firing on all cylinders, and what behaviors are either absent or present when we're not, because we want to we need to do something to change those behaviors. Right. And from that, then you create this culture that people who are aligned with it, they want to be a part of it.
My name is Ibrahim Cisse. I'm the founder of Heliona IQ and host of Heliona Insight, the podcast dedicated to helping managers and teams feel better and work better together. The most fascinating thing about leadership isn't just about strategy or execution, even though they're both very important. However, it's about culture. It's about the unspoken rules, the values that guide every decision, and the health of the organization as a whole. Now, imagine having the legal expertise to navigate those cultural challenges while fostering alignment and avoiding common pitfalls. That's exactly what my guest today, Elizabeth Souder, brings to the table. As the founder and principal advisor of What's Next Biz, Elizabeth has dedicated her career to helping businesses align their goals and values to create healthy, thriving cultures. With over 20 years of experience as a corporate attorney, Elizabeth has a unique perspective on the intersection of organizational health and legal risk. From her days as a collegiate athlete to her role as an advisor to business leaders, she's honed an approach that transforms cultures and empowers leaders to build something sustainable and impactful. In today's episode, we are diving into the value of a healthy workplace culture, why cultures eat strategy for lunch, and how leaders can avoid the fear of conflict while managing risk effectively. So, let's get started. I want to know about your experience teaching. And when I say experience, number one, how did you get into it? And number two, why are you doing that? Because there's so much going on.
It's a good question. Well, I really lucked into it like I've lucked into so many things in my career. Mm-hmm. Speaking to the director of the executive MBA program at Rockhurst University, and she and I had one of those coffees that starts off with an introduction, and then 3 hours later, you've told each other your life story, and we synced up so well in terms of our perspective on culture and organizational health and careers and entrepreneurship. And she asked me if I would come and help fill a gap in their program teaching negotiating because of my background as a lawyer. And she said, we've heard from our students that we don't cover negotiating very well in our curriculum. And I said, okay, but let's talk about, who are these people? They're not lawyers who are out negotiating deals. Right. They're negotiating within their workplace. And so I said, I'll teach negotiation, but it's going to be not the Harvard Law School version of negotiating. It's going to be about building relationships because negotiating is all about building a relationship. And even when you're a lawyer, it's about building a relationship. And I've always been curious as to why people don't really appreciate that when you're sitting across the table from a party with whom you want to do a deal, that's the first step in establishing a relationship. And if you go into that without understanding what's important to you, what's important to me, and then let's both be invested in that, because then the relationship going forward is much healthier than, I'm going to screw you over by hiding a term or, making this a really difficult deal. Well, what does that say about then the relationship going down the road? So long story short, Linda said, yes, please. We love that approach. So I'd been teaching in that course for 2 years, and it was on 3 successive Wednesdays for 4 hours a Wednesday. So it was sort of a 3 and done, right? 3 weeks and I'm finished. Well, then a friend of mine, a former colleague of mine at Sprint, she'd been teaching an undergraduate course at Rockhurst called Leading Collaborative Change. And it's a semester-long course. And due to some family challenges she was having, she asked if I would take over this course for this semester. And I naively said, sure. And it meets twice a week and it's all semester long, So I've gone from, the 3 weeks of teaching seasoned professionals, right, to now a semester long course teaching people my kids' age, And so that was, it was a little challenging at the beginning to realize, wow, I've really got to create content that's going to last from August until December. But I also looked at it as an opportunity to test out my leadership development program, which I'd been creating over the course of this year, called the Leader Coach, because I was an athlete, you're an athlete growing up. And so that concept of coaching yourself and being coached really resonated with me. So I came up with this acronym, cultivate trust, optimize your systems and processes, align with your values, catalyze performance, and harmonize consistently. And I thought, well, this is a good group of students to test this, especially given the topic of this class being leading collaborative change, help them become their own leader coaches, and then use that same model within whatever collaboration project that they chose to engage on as their final project in the class. So tomorrow is the last class, and it's exciting to hear their presentations because they've worked so hard on it over the course of the semester. The other thing I'll say is my approach to teaching has really been focused on, I'm going to give you some content. We're going to read some books. I'm going to bring in some amazing leaders who have been through change and have led teams through change. You're going to learn from them. And then you're going to go and apply all of this that you've learned in a practical setting. Because I think so oftentimes teaching or that misses that opportunity to put the practical use of what you've learned into application. That's really where the learning comes from. We can have a lot of knowledge, but until we've gone out and used it, I went to law school for 3 years, but I didn't have a clue how to practice law until I got that job. Right. And then that material starts to make sense. But why wait 3 years? Right. So to me, it was very important that these students understand what this felt like to be in a collaborative project and to go and try to effect change and have that experience before the end of the semester. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing. And I can tell that there's so much empathy in the way that you just say yes to like everything. I do. Which you shared earlier before we even started recording. But you did talk about, just earlier you mentioned something about just when it comes to negotiating, building the relationship aspect of it, which kind of just, like popped a light bulb in my head because I've never heard that perspective, but then socializing that aspect of, hey, I know I'm here to sell you something or like present you something, but I'm here to build a relationship first. I'm curious as to like, how did you get to that conclusion? And I know your background as a lawyer probably played a big part. That's my first question. And then I have another question that I want to ask as a follow-up. Well, if you think about it, and this is where I start with this, in this class, as I say, even when you go to buy a cup of coffee, you're establishing that relationship for the length of time it takes for the barista to make your cup of coffee, right? But you've established a rapport. And so sometimes that negotiation lasts for a minute. But sometimes it lasts for a lifetime, right? If you get married, and we all know marriage and partnership is a series of negotiations on a daily basis. Where I found as a lawyer it being so critical was, as I said, when I learned, because of my experience being engaged in many negotiations. Some went very well, some did not.
Right.
That if I was as invested in what was important to you and you were invested in what's important to me in getting something out of this deal, then we're going to care about it's that emotional attachment to this greater purpose of what it is we're wanting to create, or what it is we're wanting to do together, because it can't be just one-sided, right? And so the first relationship that we have is obviously the one with ourselves, and we wake up every morning
That's big.
negotiating with ourselves, right? Negotiating with those voices in our head, negotiating with, establishing our own level of trust. And I can make a commitment to myself to do the things that I've set forth to do today, right? So our first negotiation is with us. And if we don't negotiate with ourselves very well, how are we going to go out and negotiate with the next person that we come into contact with? And so negotiation is all about relationship. And I found so oftentimes, and, I spent 10 years as a lawyer at Sprint, and we'd have a big team of business people and me as the lawyer negotiating this deal. And then the minute that the deal was done, they shoved it in a drawer and walked away. And I said, I spent so much time negotiating this deal and really building this relationship. And what I'd find is they'd go and they'd start, developing the product or doing the thing or selling the widget. And then they would get into a disagreement and they'd call me and say, we need you to send a demand letter. They're not doing da-da-da. And I said, why are you being like this? Right. I went to all the trouble to establish this good relationship. So let me pick up the phone and call the attorney on the other side and say, the children aren't getting along. What can we do to fix it? Right? Because we've established that relationship. We don't need to go into the contract and start sending demand letters if we've established a relationship of trust and accountability, right? That we're going to hold one another accountable for the commitments we made in this contract. So it's the same when we go and we buy a car, right? We know that this is a negotiation. I hate buying a car, by the way. I hate it. I hate it. But going into it and establishing a trusting relationship with the person selling you the car, and you're saying, guess what? I'm going to be vulnerable and say, I don't know anything about cars the way you know things about cars. This is what's important to me in a car. I need to be able to trust you that you're going to put me in the car that meets my needs. Yeah. And that's a tough, right? You're really going into that with a vulnerable position but you want to bring them in emotionally to say, this is why this matters to me. Right? These are the things that are important to me and that are going to make me happy when I drive off the lot. So when you get people invested in what's important to you, as part of that negotiation, again, this is establishing a relationship. Right.
Wow. No, thanks for the beautiful breakdown, because I had a similar experience. I had a massive event that was scheduled to happen and then ended up getting canceled literally 3 days before the event happened. And it was a very expensive event. And the team that I was talking to, we had a great relationship, because the way that I operate, I like to meet people. I like to share my story. I like to tell them why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then, and they also shared their stories, like to a point that one of them wanted to be on my podcast, which was crazy. But then when the deal fell through, I just got a call from some random guy named Bob, and he had all these threats. And then he even said he was going to go to the media. And then it was so weird. And then I ended up calling my point of contact, and then she felt so bad. And then she was like, it's out of my hand. I don't know what to do. But until today, it doesn't matter who comes to me and asks me hey, how was the thing you were doing? And I'm like, they're horrible. Never go there.
Never go there.
But to your point, I feel like there's such a, fragmentation between leadership and the people actually doing the work. To your point, when you were, practicing as a lawyer and then you do all the deal, you build the relationships, and they just shove everything in the drawer. Yeah. And then now when it comes to you having to follow up because something happened, now they're telling you to actually put the big, like shoes
The
and
hammer,
say, hey, you guys suck. Like pay up or show up.
Right.
But like, what would you say to like leaders? Like, why do you think it's very important for leadership to be part of that negotiation process? Even not even be in it, but stay consistent and be like curious about what's happening on the relationship building side of it. Because you shared a perspective that like haven't come to my mind, which is being curious about building relationships with people, even though you're selling them something. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting, leaders establish the culture in which that it's safe to be trustful, right? Of the other side. So for instance, if I had a general counsel who was go out there and screw the other side and get the best deal, and I wouldn't have been a good fit for that in that environment. I had a general counsel who was very interested in being empathetic with whoever we were doing business with. Right. And Sprint was known as, a high class carrier, right? Yeah. It wasn't the least expensive. It didn't really want to be. It wanted to be high quality. Right. And so to have those level of standards, you have to hold yourself out in a certain way, and you want to attract the right kind of partners. So to do all those things, you have to set up a respectful relationship, right? You have to respect the other side, and your leadership has to, on a daily basis, exhibit that same level of behavior in how they treat whoever they're leading, and whoever's on the other side of the table on that negotiation or that deal. So, really holding this is where I come back. Authenticity is like one of my number one core values. Inauthenticity is, I walk away. It's such a detractor, right? So when you line up your values with and your culture with authenticity, and you're willing to say, this is who I am, this is who we are as an organization, this is how we do business, and you're going to have some people that say, well, I don't want to be a part of that. Good. Excellent. Because that means that there's going to be more room for the people who do want to be a part of that and who do want to do deals with us. And I have a number of examples of deals that I ended up recommending we walk away from because I could tell the other side was shady. I could tell the other side was not being on the up and up. And then I would go to my leadership and say, these are my concerns. And then they trusted me. Right. And we were able to engage in a healthy conversation around, I understand why the business might want this, but I don't think it's good for our brand. Right. We're going down the road in a direction that's not ultimately aligned with who we are.
Yeah, I feel like I should put that on a t-shirt. Not good for your culture.
It's not good for your culture.
And like, speaking of culture, I saw your post that you shared on LinkedIn, and you like had a phrase, and you said, culture is strategy for lunch. Yeah. And I want you to like expound on that a little bit. Like, what does it mean? And like, is that part of your like modality when you have those one-on-ones or the, the schools that you teach at?
I think, I didn't come up with the phrase. It's a very popular phrase, but it is one that I believe in. I've been thinking a lot about the word resilience and resiliency. And I spoke a couple weeks ago at the Global Entrepreneurship Week, and on the topic of organizational health and why it's important and how it helps avoid common legal pitfalls. And the idea here is you can have the best strategy. And this happened, again, very often at Sprint when we'd bring in a outside consulting firm, and they'd have this great strategy for how we should organize or reorganize. But if that strategy wasn't aligned with the culture, it was doomed for failure, right? I mean, you can think of, I'm a basketball nut. And so you can think of, and I draw analogies with basketball all the time and parenting, but think of basketball player, and I'm not a big LeBron James fan, so I'm going to kind of pick on him. But think about here's someone who he just goes around team to team shopping for rings, right? He's not building the culture of a team. You can have he is by far, I'm sure, the best basketball player. I don't know. Steph Curry's pretty good too. You could make that argument, but I believe that a mediocre, talented team with a very strong culture, like Greg Popovich has down in Texas, you could have mediocre talent and a strong culture, and they're going to beat that team with the talented individual but with no cohesive culture, right?
Indeed.
Back when I was at Sprint, GE, Jack Welch, had adopted a system of performance reviews where they would stack rank all the employees from 1 to 5. Right. 1 being the best, 5 being the worst, or I can't remember exactly. And then they would fire everyone who was a 5.
Wow.
And it was brutal. It was brutal, but
imagine being at 4.
But it was authentic to GE's culture, right? Sprint decided to do that.
Oh man.
And it was an absolute failure. It was not aligned. So there's a strategy there, right? A strategy on how to conduct performance reviews and how to go about culling out your bad performers. But if it's not aligned with the culture of the organization, it's doomed to fail. Right. And in this, you could say the same thing about a growth strategy. A growth strategy that isn't supported by the culture of the organization is not going to have the same results as one that is aligned. Right. And I so often find myself, and this happened time and time again, particularly as a lawyer, working in places like what PlexPod used to be, a co-working space, where you'd run into an entrepreneur and you'd start talking to them about their business, and you'd say, well, what's your corporate structure? And they'd say, well, I don't know. I just picked an LLC because the guy sitting next to me, that's what he did. Well, that doesn't maybe make sense for what you want to do, right? So stop for a minute and think about, why did you create this business? Right. What core values and behaviors are valuable to you, are going to differentiate you in the marketplace from your competitor, from someone else that does the same thing? Align those systems and processes to make the right thing easy. And then let your people, empower your people to go and do it. So oftentimes I find leaders, they can't sort of let go. Right? They're constantly in their people's business, sort of telling them how to do their jobs. Right. And one of my favorite people, Harry Campbell, who's a fantastic leader, he would consistently say, look, these people are adults. You hired them to do something, empower them, get out of their way. And then your job as a leader is to remove the impediments to their success. Right. Right. So in that way, you're building that culture that's empowering the people to do what you've hired them to do. Right. And then you develop the strategy, because then the strategy is authentic to your business and to your way of doing things. Right. So I find that people that sort of go with the off the shelf, strategy, or they adopt someone else's strategy because it worked for them. It just doesn't work for all business. You and I, if our strategy to get in shape was to, I run 5 miles, maybe you don't run 5 miles. Maybe you lift weights. I mean, we can both get in really good shape, but we're going to use different exercises. I'm a woman, you're a man. You can lift more weights than I. So do you see, it always has to be aligned with what you're capable of doing, what's important to you. Right. And what are those habits that you formed in your systems and processes to support it?
No, yeah. I mean, even to that point, a thought came to my mind, which is, in my own experience, I was doing something for almost 7 years, and I realized I was in the wrong market. And the whole time I had a feeling, but then to your point, I like what I was doing, and I like the concept that I've created, and it was working, but I was struggling. I was just I felt like I was hitting the wall all the time, the whole time. But then the moment I actually, open up to like feedback, and I realized I'm actually in the wrong market. What am I doing? So and then the pivot and the exchange of, me letting go and then saying, all right, I love doing this, but it's not what I'm supposed to do, even though it took me 7 years. But
it all leads. I saw it was a meme or a TikTok with George Clooney recently, and he said, "Listen, we don't learn because of our success. We learn because of our failures."
Indeed.
And if you, I have a student who has been going through some struggles this semester, and I sat down and I said, look, I understand that this has been a tough semester for all these reasons, but you can look at them as failures, or you can look at them as opportunities for growth. What message am I receiving here? Your experience of 7 years of doing but you learn so much by having done that. You learn the perseverance. You bumped up against the barriers and kept yourself going. And I don't think you'd be able to do what you're doing today if you hadn't gone through that experience. Does it make sense?
No, yeah, it makes sense. And the whole time that I was going through all of that, especially in the last 2 years, I was like, man, I wish I had a good lawyer next to me. And internally, they can just review all the things that I was signing. Because again, I kind of started it as like doing something with my friends, and it grew like really fast, like to a point that we had a team of 65 people full time. Like, it was insane. And we also had contractors also. But then I had to let go of so many people, and then which also turned into so much drama.
Yes.
And then I realized I was just literally going to Google and just creating contracts and just signing.
Oh,
because I was like, they're my friends. But then I learned so much, but then they were all horrible mistakes that I did. So yeah, to your point, the whole time I was like, man, like nowadays, whenever I have conversations with friends that are starting up, I always tell them, please, I know it can be expensive. Talk to a lawyer. I don't care how much it is. Just try to figure out how to find a lawyer that can tell you, hey, this is what you need to do, and this are the paperwork you need. Just spend $500 and just get something, and to like start. But I do want to go back to the culture piece, because you shared about, just like culture eats like strategy. How does a company identify culture, and how do they align that to like strategy? Because that's something that I'm currently struggling with.
I love this question.
I'd love to get some free advice.
I love this question because my approach, here's what I believe, is that culture is the result of the behaviors that are encouraged and tolerated within the organization. Just like you don't go and get off the shelf strategy, you don't go get off the shelf culture, right? So my approach whenever I'm dealing with a new client is if they say they have core values, I validate them, because core values show up in the behaviors of the organization, and you'll have them whether you want them or not. Sometimes they can be toxic behaviors and they need to be changed, but you look at what are the behaviors that drive us when we're firing on all cylinders. What behaviors were present that got us there? When things go awry, what behaviors were missing, right? So we analyze and we identify 3 to 5, because I do not tell me you can have 14 core values, because you can never remember them. So you have 3 to 5 core values. From there, you look at your systems and your processes, and you say, how are our systems and processes making the right thing easy? How are they helping us live into those core values and make those behaviors second nature and habitual? From that, we then create the culture. And if you think about culture as, we have an American culture, there's a French culture, there's a Native American, original American cultures. They're driven by the behaviors of what that group of people is willing to tolerate. And I read this, I did yoga on Friday with my daughter, and the instructor had this great quote. He said, one of the most effective things you can do to build better habits is to join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior.
Oh, wow.
Right? So culture is that series of behaviors, right? Isn't that cool?
I'm just processing that right now.
I know.
I wish that was the camera so they could see.
One of the most effective things you can do to build better habits is to join a culture where your desired behavior is the normal behavior. I love that.
Yeah.
Because that helps us understand that if you want to build a better culture, you have to understand, again, what behaviors are present when we are in sync, collaborating, firing on all cylinders, and what behaviors are either absent or present when we're not, because we need to do something to change those behaviors.
Right. And
from that, then you create this culture that people who are aligned with it, they want to be a part of it. And Abram, every client I've worked with at an organizational level, when we do this exercise of identifying and validating core values, inevitably in that next stage where we align those values with the systems and operations, two things happen. People who are not aligned and are toxic in the culture, they leave. They leave on their own because they can tell one of these things is not like the other, and that's me. Like I'm not aligned. This is hippy dippy. This is uncomfortable. Well, there's a reason it's uncomfortable because you're not aligned with it. And then we don't have to fire anybody. We don't have to put anyone on a PIP. We don't have to create a corrective action plan. They just leave, which is great. We also find that we're not doing business with the same people anymore because we're teaching people how to treat us differently. And some people won't want to do business with us because when we stand up and say, this is who I am, right? When we as individuals stand up and say, this is who I am, sometimes we lose friends.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But that's okay because then it makes space for someone who is going to be a better friend to come in. It's going to make space for a better customer who's not going to be toxic and take so much time and energy to manage and make happy. So again, I think people are attracted to the cultures that drive that support the behaviors and the habits that they feel comfortable with. And if we stop trying to force, again, Sprint can't have T-Mobile's culture and AT&T's culture. You got to have your own culture, and you have to protect it. And that's the job of a leader, right? Is to protect the culture. I'll tell you another really great story. When I first started getting into this area of organizational health, I was still practicing law, but I went to an event at a fintech event, and I walked up, and I think my friend Terry Campbell was actually speaking at it. And I walked up to this group of gentlemen who were there, and I said, well, what brings you to this event? We're talking about culture, talking about leadership. And they took out this book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. And they said, our organization is preparing for massive growth. We plan to double in size, and our leader wants everyone to read this book because she wants us to preserve the culture that has made us successful as we grow, which is so critically important because time and time again, I go back to my experience as an employee, Sprint or Hush Blackwell or what, you'd go through these mergers and you'd go through the growth. And no one was paying attention to the culture of the organization that was coming in. And if we weren't paying attention to it, and I asked a leader, I said, when are we going to pay attention to the fact that the cultures of these two firms are so dramatically different? And you know what he said? He said, we're never going to talk about it because it's too painful.
Ooh.
It gets easier to talk about the money. It's easier to talk about the synergies and that are going to be created by this business combination. Talking about the culture, that makes people feel uncomfortable.
That's so interesting.
Which is so crazy. So this enlightened leader who was having her people be very intentional about what are we going to do to preserve the culture as we onboard new people into our organization, or if we acquire another company, how are we going to be mindful of the culture fit issue and telling them this is who we are? These are the behaviors that are acceptable to us. These are the behaviors that we don't tolerate, and being willing to walk away if that's not the right combination. If that's going to pollute the culture that made you successful, it's not worth it. Right?
Wow. No, like that, I'm like still processing what you said, because I like remember, I went to Los Angeles, and, I was talking, I was doing like a wellness experience at like this architectural firm. And they also went to like a huge like acquisition. They like acquired a new company and they merged, and there's like so many different people. And that's when I even came up with the concept of like Heliona. And I noticed that, every company, every manager had their own culture that was different from the other manager. And then they had all of these like tribal groups. Like, it was so bizarre. Like, I spoke to one group completely different, and then I spoke to other groups completely different. It's like they were they're not aligned in any way whatsoever. And when you mentioned that, and I was like, whoa, that's insane. I'm still like processing just how important that is. But I did have a question that also popped in my head. I'm trying to just capture all my thoughts because everything is flying right now. Do you think, like quiet quitting also plays at companies that don't have, a solid culture?
Absolutely.
So people are seeing that this doesn't align with what I want. And now they are leaving.
And it's interesting because I've always been very fortunate, much to my husband's chagrin, in that when I started to not feel very happy in my job, I went and got a different job. I was never so wedded to, and believe me, when you're an attorney and you decide to not be an attorney anymore, a lot of people look at you like you're crazy. And it wasn't that I didn't enjoy being an attorney. I was an attorney for over 25 years. The practice of law changed so much. When I left Sprint, it was because Sprint had merged with Nextel, and their general counsel had become the general counsel for the new company. And he didn't understand long distance. He was only interested in wireless, and he shoved all those Sprint lawyers into the long distance world, and he didn't really care about what we were. So the culture there changed, and I said, it's time for me to leave. So rather than quietly quitting, I mean, to me, that's it's cowardly. It's not authentic. And you need to put on your big girl pants and go in and say, this isn't for me anymore. And that's okay. And I think one of the things that younger generations are doing a much better job of doing is to say, we're not going to have one job for 35 years. We're not going to have one career, and that's okay. And I think my generation, Gen Xers, we were coming off of the baby boomer thinking that we all have to be loyal to these companies forever. And I don't think that's not true anymore. And we get to choose to be whatever we want to be, right? And in this digital world, we can easily pick up new skills and discovered, this area of organizational health, it didn't even exist to my knowledge 20, 30 years ago, right? And so had I known that I was going to be going into this area, would I have not been a lawyer? I doubt it. I still enjoy doing that. And it helped me. I now can think about organizational health as it's sort of is a cure for those common legal issues. Because I go back to resilience. When you have taken care, when you've taken care of your personal health, and when you get the flu, you're going to bounce back more readily, more quickly, right? Than if you've been sitting on the couch eating potato chips and drinking beer all day, right? The same goes for your organization. Stuff is going to happen. It's not going to be rainbows and roses every day. We know this about business. But when we've taken the time to establish a healthy organization and a healthy culture, when those landmines occur, we can bounce back more quickly. Right. And I liken it to a beach ball, right? When we've blown up that beach ball full of health and oxygen, it's going to bounce much easier than if we just put little puffs into it whenever something goes wrong. Yeah. Right. So when do we pour into our organization? When we have quiet quitting. When do we pour into our organization? When we have attrition problems. When are we going to pour into when we have that bad customer, when we get sued, then we're going to care about it. Right. But as soon as that's taken care of, we go back to our old habits. Right. Right. That's not going to make a healthy organization. That's that reactive. That's and again, we find this so many times with entrepreneurs not wanting to organize themselves properly and hire a lawyer, because then they finally get that first round of seed money and they spend it all in lawsuits. Oh man. Because the founders aren't aligned, because the people aren't aligned, because they've hired their friends and they haven't had honest conversations with them around expectations. Tell me about it. And so taking the time and people think it takes so much, it really, and I go back to personal health. It's like going to the gym go for 10 minutes. Right. Just go for a walk. Just do something that takes care of your personal health in these little tiny bite-sized pieces, and it all stacks up, right? Right. It all stacks up to being a healthier person. It all stacks up to having a healthier organization, where you won't have the quiet quitting, where you won't have the litigation, et cetera. Wow. No, like, I mean, yeah, this is, usually whenever I have guests, I feel like I'm getting a therapy session. Because, one of the reasons why I created this podcast, because I was like, I realized I made so many crazy mistakes, but then they were all like, the best learning experience I've ever had. Even right now, like people in my life are always like, how are you still doing this? I'm like, you guys have no idea. This is like the best college I've ever had. Yeah. And just every day showing up and learning. And then, and for some reason, I can tell whenever I'm making, those mistakes, but for some reason I have difficulty, like realizing or like observing it early. And by the time I do, it's like a little bit late. And then to your point, to like quiet quitting, I feel like people in my generation, we're known for quiet quitting, like millennials, and like younger millennials and older millennials in the middle. We are known to quiet quit because some of us cannot handle conflict. Some of us are afraid to hear someone else's opinion because we grow up in spaces where that's all we hear. So, when we go to work, we want to go to work. And if we don't want to be there, it's easier for most of them to just be like, all right, I'm just going to slowly X my way out of here. But don't you think it's because people are afraid? Because I do a lot of work with people on building trust is the foundation. And then the next is, once you have that foundation of trust, then you can have healthy conflict. Right. And I think we're afraid of words like conflict and negotiation. And it feels like you versus me, as opposed to you and me. And I listened to a really great podcast yesterday, talking about the importance of diversity of thoughts and language. Like if all we do are surround ourselves with people just like us, then our ideas aren't going to be as good as if we surround ourselves with people with from all different backgrounds. And in this podcast, it was a physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston who ran this massive lab. But he said, I don't just hire chemists and biologists. He said, I hire data scientists. I hire professors. He said, I've even had high school interns because that young perspective, that fresh idea, right? That young person is going to come up with some observation that nobody else in the room could have made, because we're all so used to doing what we do in the same manner and thinking like one another. Right. So I think it's critical if we can reframe conflict as like a healthy debate or an exchange of ideas. Right. And going up to your boss and saying, I'm just not very happy in this job anymore. Give them the opportunity to say, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. What can we do about that? Could could we help you find a different job within the organization? Or is it time for you to leave this organization? And who can I help? People want to help you.
Right.
And quiet quitting, you're not allowing people to do what I think people are naturally inclined to do for one another.
Right. Well, to our point, to my generation point, is like most of us have a wrong idea of what corporate America is, and I think this starts at the recruiting level, because you go and you have to dress a certain way. So there's a lack of like authenticity from the beginning. So most of them get a job not being themselves. So they create this persona. It's like, there's a term for it. I can't even like, it's not like coming to me, but it's very common on TikTok where, they have a different version of themselves as they're navigating the workspace, depending on who looks like them, who doesn't look like them. And I think that also leads to quiet quitting, because from the beginning of, from point A of hiring, people are not being themselves most of the time.
Right.
And I know the Gen Z do a better job of that. They will show up as who they are. They don't try to be someone else, which I love about the Gen Z. I don't know how the heck they do it. but I think with my generation, there's a lack of like authenticity that occurs from the beginning to the end. And I honestly don't know what's the solution. Maybe you have some insights about how to help, companies can help, people as they, onboard into the organization. How can they make sure that they're healthy, not just on their resume, but who they are.
I work with a lot of organizations, and I'll be honest, I didn't think I was going to get into this level of sort of HR kind of work.
I know it's so like intertwined,
but
like
it's hard. It's difficult to avoid it. So one of the first things I do with many organizations, because we inevitably end up sort of reorganizing, because for some reason, whatever the structure is, which, by the way, I think boxes and titles and all, I would love to get rid of all of it, but people need to have some clarity around what they're hired to do. Exactly. But I always rewrite job descriptions. I find there's nothing authentic about saying you need to have all these skill sets, right, in order to do this job. No, you hire for the culture fit, and then you train the people. Why would you want to have somebody, and when I look and I say they want 5 to 7 years of experience doing exactly this thing. Really? So you want me to come in with all of my preconceived notions about how this job should be done, and all the habits from the former employers that I worked for that taught me that this was the way to do it, or I adopted that, and I'm going to come join your culture and tell you, well, we shouldn't do it that way. We should do it the way that I did it. It's the worst idea. Hire somebody that's qualified based upon the basic description of whatever it is that you need to have done, but then take the time to train them on how you want the job done. Right? So, and believe me, I'm a child of the 80s. When I went to law school, you guys are built
different for sure.
And when I went to law school, I'll never forget one of my parents' friends telling me, please don't dress like a man. Because back in the 80s, if you think about the fashion and the way that women dressed, it was all based upon like the male suit, right? We even had like little bow ties that we'd wear. I mean, it was almost like gender neutrality in this other bizarre, from a fashion sense. So and one of my promises to myself when I stopped being a lawyer and I became an entrepreneur was I was going to wear jeans every day. And if I walked into an office and my new client was offended by the fact I was wearing jeans, then I probably shouldn't be working with them. Right? Because that's what I'm comfortable in. And so I think it's really important for an employer and for a candidate to show up with that level of authenticity. If the employer is offended by the attire of the person that's walking in, then that's very superficial. I mean, bad on them. I mean, as long as it's not completely offensive. But if they're going to judge that person based upon what they're wearing or the way in which they speak, then I'm probably not going to be doing very much work with that employer because that's so superficial. Get to know the person. So the second part of your question is, what do you do in that interview process?
Right.
So we really dive into developing good interview questions that allow a person to really show themselves I go insofar as to say, hey, what did you do when you were in high school? What kind of work did you do? Oh, as a lifeguard. Oh, tell me about that. Because being a lifeguard requires some leadership. It requires a certain level of skill. You can learn a lot about a person by asking, what did you do in your summer jobs, right? What do you like to do for fun? What about that? You can sort of gauge their fit for that job but you have to be curious about them at a level that's beyond, what did you do for the last 6 years? Tell me about your greatest strengths, your greatest weaknesses. I mean, those are such ridiculous questions to ask that I think if I was sitting in front of an employer and those are the questions that they were asking me, I would probably get up and leave because if that's your level of curiosity, then it sounds like this is a very cookie cutter organization that I probably wouldn't want to work for.
Right. No, like, thank you. Cause you're validating all of my positive biases about, like workplace culture, HR, all of that. And, and as we were talking, a quote just came into my head. I actually wrote it down cause I'll forget. And I wrote culture begins at the job description. I feel like that should be something that it should be shared with everybody.
I love that.
Culture begins at the job description.
Absolutely. And your job description, it should start with, these are our values. This is our value statement. Right. And this is the kind of person we're looking to attract. Right. And when I work with clients, because we're hiring, because those people I told you about, that aren't aligned, they leave. So now we've got to hire. And when we write that posting, that job posting, people that come in to interview, they always mention it. I've never seen a job posting that started out introducing an organization's core values. Right. I was really drawn to the fact that these are your core values and you're willing to be open and honest. And I'm like, yeah, if you're not willing to be open and honest and start with that, then why would I want to work with you? Right. So it's so distinctive. And I don't understand what it is about the traditional HR recruiting world that believes that job descriptions or job postings need to follow a certain format, where the qualifications are always at the bottom and sometimes it's really not very clear what the job itself is because they're so busy talking about themselves, I know. So I think we can get, yes, to your point, culture begins with the job description. Right. Culture begins with that recruiting process. Indeed. Culture begins with how you onboard. I, again, have worked with clients where their onboarding was 1 day. A person isn't onboarded in a day. It takes 90 days to truly onboard a candidate. It's not a 90 days of nothing but onboarding. It's they need to be introduced to their teammates. They need to understand what everyone else in the team does. They need to shadow people. They need to be taken out to lunch. They need to be They need to experience what it's like. It's like dating. Yes, it is. Yeah. And so that onboarding experience is also a critical piece of culture.
Wow. This is amazing. This is literally the first question that I have written, and we've just been talking about it. I haven't even got to the almost 15 different questions. But whoa, thank you for all this. I am, I've always been fascinated by company culture in general, because like to my point earlier, whenever I talk to one manager, they're never aligned. And it's becoming a recurring theme. And I know COVID also played a big part of people, working from home and not being connected and not being in physical spaces. And it's also something that I've been trying as far as figuring out how companies can, create experiences where employees can, because they spend the whole year doing virtual. Imagine if you have a recorder where they meet in person and then actually get to have that in-person experience. Yep. What do you think of that as someone who is a culture specialist and also organizational health? I love that. How did you come up with that first? And then what do you think about my question?
How did I come up with what?
With the organizational health.
Well, it is a term. I mean, Patrick Lencioni says that that's what he does is organizational health. I find that people sort of look at you and say, no, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, because you think of healthcare.
And yes, so they think what I mean is like, what are the healthcare benefits within an organization? No. We're talking about, so
they're like, what benefits?
I go back to organizations are people. They, within the eyes of the law, first of all, they can't be formed without a person, right? I have my own organization, an LLC. So they're formed by people. They're populated by people. It stands to reason, therefore, that they, and I have a slide that I always put up about this. They have ancestors, right? They have founders that founded them. We have ancestors. Right. They have a DNA based upon their structure and what distinguishes them in the marketplace from, just like you and I have DNA. Right. They actively participate in a marketplace. They exercise, right? They get nutrients from their interactions with their customers. Some of them are healthy nutrients and some of them aren't. And they need to sleep. Right. You know, we need to sleep. Organizations need to sleep. They need to pause. And I heard you on one of your podcasts talking about this from a mental health perspective, taking that pause, right? To reframe what all that negative thinking that might be going on in your mind, and how do you sort of stop it and pause? And an organization needs to pause from time to time and reflect on what is going well, what could we be doing better? We need to rest, right? And so I and again, having grown up an athlete, I know that when I was in training, I ate differently. I slept different. I paid attention to my diet in a different way when I was in season than when I wasn't. And an organization is so similar. And I think we make it more difficult than it needs to be. Absolutely. Honestly. So when I'm talking about organizational health, I'm talking about everything from how is it that you attend to those, to that corporate structure, those filings that you need to make, the taxes you need to pay, the bills you need to pay, et cetera, that sort of that element of it. But then there's also the people side of it. Right. What are you doing to foster that environment of empowered people? And one of my favorite phrases is the test for alignment is unsupervised action. So we have to step back as leaders and empower people to do what they were hired to do, but then step back and watch the behavior. So we can tell if they're aligned, because when we're not supervising them, they're doing the right thing and they're performing and they're actually performing at 110% because we've empowered them. Right. Wow.
No, yeah. No, I like wholeheartedly agree. It's like something that I've noticed as a trend with the Freedom Project, because and for context, Freedom Project is something that I used to do in the past. Yeah, I'm so happy to say that. It's been a long journey, but I noticed a consistent trend of people actually telling me, "Hey, how can we bring our teams to this?" And initially, I'm like, oh, I don't even sell tickets. It's for free. Just show up and have a great time. Because I have like key sponsors that usually pay for all that, and then I just make it open for because back then my mindset was like, people just need mental health. People need access to mental health, and I kept doing that, but then people kept asking like, hey, how much does it cost to do this? To like bring our team? I was say, oh no, it's for free. And then, but the question kept coming up. And then I had a, like group of law firms, actually show up, and they gave me such good feedback. And I was like, oh, so this is a problem. I didn't realize culture was such a bad, it's such a big problem within corporate America, like mid-market to like SMBs, they were all struggling with culture. But like one thing that I wanted, and I know we're getting to the ending of it, so there'll definitely be a part 2.
Yeah, I would love to come back and
talk about 2 questions. Like I'm not even making this up. Just 2 questions.
I would love to come back anytime.
There's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like 15 extra questions, which will be part 2, and I'll do better to like actually find out everything
this has been so fun.
Okay, good. And as far as I do want to talk about conflict, because you worked as a lawyer first, and then now you've transitioned into like working with companies. Now you found yourself working with schools to actually teach. Like there's so much going on at the same time. And number one, what's the cost of doing all of that? You don't have to be too personal, but if you feel like it. And number two, is there a conflict in doing all of that as an individual? And I know you were helping so many people, but at the same time, like how do you balance all that?
Balance it all. I think I go back to the alignment, because I don't really think of it as being all so different.
Right.
I think it's just, it's the same thing in different environments.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. One of my goals for the year had been to impact 500 people with my leadership development and organizational health programming. And I realized that being able to speak to a class of 30 students, right? All of a sudden I'm impacting 30 people, not just one, right? Speaking at Global Entrepreneurship Week. I was speaking on the same topic. I was just packaging it differently for that audience. So I find that I'm repeating similar messages. I'm getting people to think differently. I'm helping them think differently about their organizations and be a little bit more mindful, be less policy driven and be more health focused. And when I go to speak to groups and I do goal setting for an individual and goal setting for an organization, and it's the same approach, I'm not changing it. So I think the cost has been, at times being overscheduled and feeling like, how did I sign up to do all of this on this kind of a time frame? Not getting to the podcast idea I told you about or the book idea that I told you about, right? So that has been a little bit of a sacrifice, but I've also gained so much. I love doing workshops. I'm getting to lead a group of young attorneys through a leadership development program for a client of mine. And I prepared mostly for the first session. It was 3 hours, but I also just allowed it to evolve organically. I also just got comfortable being uncomfortable. And I think that when we just do the same thing over and over again, it gets pretty dull. We lose our flair, right? So I think I learn a lot when I'm sort of repackaging that message for a different audience. But I do find, I told you authenticity is my number one core value. There is consistency and alignment in no matter the audience that I'm speaking to or the engagement. The purpose of the engagement, I am repeating the same themes, just packaged differently depending on the needs of whoever it is I'm speaking to. Wow, does that make sense?
No, yeah. It makes a lot of sense for me specifically, because one thing that I've noticed, what keeps me going, because I don't like doing workshops, but then when I do it, I get really good feedback, but at the same time, I find myself learning from the people in the room instead of me teaching them. I'm not sure if that's how it's supposed to be. But then at the end of the day, they enjoyed so much. And I remember my therapist, and because I work with a lot of therapists at the same time. But my own personal therapist told me before, she even recommended that I should become a therapist because she's like, she saw me, like talking to a few people and they were all just sharing things that at the moment I had no idea that was the first time they've shared that. But to her, and she was like, this is amazing. Like, you make people open up and share things. I'm just like, I'm usually just telling my story. And I've been doing that for so long that it becomes like, a normal thing for me to just meet someone and just be vulnerable with them, but a very healthy amount of it, which also makes them open up. and then share things. And I see the same thing happening when I'm having those workshops. I hate doing them because, it's just very depleting for me.
Is it? Okay.
It's a lot of work for like mentally, physically, my body just, I can't handle it. Because I think what usually the way that it ends up is, people are genuinely sharing, and then I'm hearing all of those stories coming at me, and I'm just like, oof, that's heavy. Yeah. But at the same time, I find myself learning from them. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure whether you have the same experience.
Always. And I've learned so much, and I've made a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. I've had some pretty big flops. I think I always come out of a workshop, whether it's a day-long workshop or a 4-hour workshop, and I have always learned something. And I'm always amazed that the thing I took for granted, mm-hmm. or the thing I didn't think was going to be very impactful, ends up to be the most impactful, or ends up to be the most important, or ends up being the thing that people remember the most about whatever our session is together. So I would just say, in many ways, like, you're a vessel and you're responding to what the needs of, you're in service to the people mm-hmm. that you're speaking to. Right. And for you to open up and be vulnerable and share your story, I'm not surprised that people then just are immediately open and wanting to, because you are so good about sharing it. And as you and I have discussed multiple times, this issue of mental health is so critical, and we give it a lot of lip service, but, and we don't need to go down this road all the way at all, but, the legislation, the sort of structure, the structural support mm-hmm. for that. So I go back to that alignment, right? So we've said that mental health is important. Well, we need to build trust among those who struggle with mental health. And I think that's pretty much all of us at some level. We need to have the support structures in place to continue supporting that. And I think workplaces are doing a better job of it, mm-hmm. but there's still so much more we can be doing, right? I know, indeed. So thank you for opening the conversation. Mm-hmm. I think that alone, this podcast alone, mm-hmm. is in service to so many people who are going to listen and say, oh, you mean I'm not the only one that's struggling with that? I'm not the only one that's feeling that? Yep. It's very interesting because I get that feedback a lot of people just like texting me. Yeah. And then they're like, oh, wow, that was a really good conversation. I'm sorry, you listening? Yeah. Thank you for listening, guys. But yeah, and we're getting to the closing of it, and that'll be a part 2, of course, where we can go dive into so many different areas that I've highlighted. The other 15 questions you have. I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. And this is the first time I've had a guest where I only ask 2 questions. Normally I always have like 4 questions left, but this is the first time I've had 15. And I think you're also going to break the record of the longest episode. Oh, no, well, you can edit it. Believe me. I'm sure you can edit it. And I have 2 questions. And the first one is like, what's one thing that you hope, people that are listening to this, especially like leaders, what do you want them to take away from this conversation? I want them to take a deep breath and mm-hmm. say, maybe there's a different way I could be thinking about my leadership. Right. I think, and you've pointed this out in multiple podcasts, it's a lonely job at mm-hmm. the top. And I know a number of leaders that work with executive coaches, and I love that because you can work on your stuff and you can work on, but I like to work within the organization and really help that leader understand their role is to empower their people and then get out of their way and help them do the right thing and make the right thing easy. Right. I want leaders to look at the number of policies that they have, and I hope shred them all or at least half of them, and think about what could I do differently so I don't even need this policy. Indeed. Right? If we're managing by policy, we're failing. So manage with trust. right? Manage with empathy, manage with getting to know the person, not necessarily the job. I would really invite leaders to think about, and I'll go back to that, my coach acronym. If you think about the first 3 steps of cultivating trust, optimizing systems and processes, and aligning with core values, that's all preparation. And as athletes, we know that I had to shoot a lot of layups before ever I got to play in a game, right? And I was there, I want to play, and I want to scrimmage, coach. No, we got to do all these drills first, right? So preparation is key. And so as a leader, the first 3 steps are to prepare. And if you prepare yourself first by putting on your own oxygen mask, let's not forget that. If you do those, if you help by preparing yourself and then by preparing your people and your organization to succeed, then you can catalyze that performance and get 110% out of people without even trying. And then you've created that resilient environment in which you can harmonize consistently, because we know that things are going to happen and you're going to have to bring harmony back. And as a leader, you're kind of like, I called it, because I have 4 kids, right? So once we got past the 2, we were playing zone defense, and it was like catch and release and throw the kids back in, right? So as a leader, you're constantly having to be in that position of responding to whatever is going wrong. And again, keeping people on track, but you've got that baseline, that resilient organization that's capable then of that performance. So, I would just invite leaders, take 10 minutes a day and think of ways that you could pour more into your organization from like its health. What does it need to thrive?
Wow. That's very beautiful. And like, I love that you always break down what all of your points. That's the educator in you. and I also love that you were telling leaders to shred at least half of those
please
policies.
Shred half your policies.
And that's coming from a lawyer. Okay. So you don't need all that handy.
You really don't.
Policies. Talk to your people. And my very final question. This one is a closing question. Okay. And the reason why I ask it is because whenever I'm talking to leaders, I notice that they talk about everything else except themselves. So I like to close with having my guests, just go back, just recenter. And my question goes like, how's your spirit after everything that we've talked about so far?
Oh, how is my spirit? My spirit it's tingling at the moment. I feel so poured into, because you've just helped me engage in this amazing conversation and talk about something that I'm very passionate about. And that itself is such a gift. So thank you. I feel extreme gratitude and just really, really beautiful experience of being in conversation with you.
Yeah,
so thank you for that.
I love the jacket, by the way. I'm going to have to find where to get that. For those listening, she has a dope blazer on. I don't even know how to describe
I shop
it.
Local.
Yeah, there you go. Shop local. But yeah, thank you so much for being for being here today, for being a vessel for empathy, for keeping companies and people and their organizations healthy, making sure that that is accountability throughout the body. So so thank you.
It's been an honor.
This
has
been a very beautiful conversation, and I can't wait for people to hear it. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
And in closing, I want to share a message of hope for all the frontline managers and future managers out there. Think about all that you are instead of all that you are not. You are capable, brave, and significant, even when it feels like you are not. You face countless challenges, but remain resilient. You've been hurt, yet you still stand proud and smile for your people. Embrace your journey, cherish those who uplift you, and remember, your worth is defined by the kindness and strength you show yourself first. Your imperfections make you unique and resilient. Keep shining because the world needs your light. Thank you for listening to Heliona Insight. Until next time, keep inspiring.